Today is Memorial Day, and I just want to ask you the question, what does Memorial Day mean to you? And do you know what one easy thing is you can do today that would mean so much for the men and women who have served our country? And would you like to hear what it feels like to go to war, to lose a leg, to lose an eye, to lose a friend, or to give that ultimate sacrifice? Today, you will get an inside perspective from the author of Healing Waters, the book that shares the stories of veterans in their own words. Hey, I'm Dave, host of the Wet Fly Swing podcast. I've been fly fishing since I was a little kid. I grew up around a little fly shop and have created one of the largest fly fishing podcasts in this country. I've also interviewed more of the greatest fly anglers than just about anyone in the world. Beau Beasley, author of a number of great books in the Mid-Atlantic area, founder of 2 huge fly fishing festivals, and author of Healing Waters, is going to take us inside the lives of the people he interviewed for this book, Healing Waters. You're going to find out who Brian Mancini is and why he is not with us anymore. The story behind Brian is a powerful one for Beau. And you'll also find out what the hardest part was of writing these 35 stories of wounded veterans and how he did it. And you're also going to find out why people are reading this book cover to cover and why they can't put it down. This is a powerful one on a powerful day. This is a emotional roller coaster with Beau. Hope you enjoy it. Here we go. Beau Beasley. Beau, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, Dave. Thanks. Thanks for having me back on your show.
Yeah. Appreciate you coming on here. We have a really important topic to cover. I think you've got some exciting news. A book you've been working on for a long time, Healing Waters, is out. I have a copy. It's a really powerful book. We talked about it a little bit on the last episode we did. I'll put a link in the show notes, episode 400, where we talked about basically some of the people that you wrote this book for. You told some stories there. So maybe take us back for those people that didn't hear episode 400. Maybe give a brief description of who you are and what this book is about.
Well, I've been an outdoor writer for many, many years, and I had just finished my second book, Fly Fishing the Mid-Atlantic, and the illustrator, Alan Folger, contacted me just about the day that book came out and said, I've got an idea for another book. And I said, Alan, I just finished a book. I really don't want to do another one. And he said, no, I've got a great idea. I want you to write a book about Project Healing Waters. And of course, I knew about the organization. I've written about them multiple times, but I really had no desire to write a book because, writing a guidebook is one thing. Writing a book about real people and their experiences in the military and how Project Healing Waters and fly fishing had helped them was something I didn't think I was capable of doing. So I kept putting him off, and he kept calling me. He called me every couple of months for 2 years, believe it or not. And finally, I said, Alan, listen, I don't think I can do this, and I'm just not. I'm just not going to do it. Quit calling me. And there was dead silence on the phone, and I said, Alan, did you hear me? Now, Alan is a artist of some note from North Carolina, has done a lot of artwork, and Alan Folger is also a jeweler, but he served in the military and served in Vietnam. And I said, Alan, did you hear me? He said, yeah, I heard you. I said, well, what do you think? He said, well, here's the problem. Sooner or later, they're going to quit fighting in Afghanistan, and they're going to quit fighting in Iraq, and they're going to forget all about these veterans, and you can't let that happen. Now, that really got to me because Alan served in Vietnam, and when he came back, the media had done such a fantastic job of demonizing our veterans that they were just looked on as worse than the enemy. And it was so bad, they actually had to change clothes. When they flew back into the country, they were under orders to go into the closest bathroom and get out of their military clothes and get into civilian clothes to keep from being accosted and attacked by the civilian population, again, because the media had so demonized them. So Alan knew what it was like to come back from Vietnam and not get any kind of welcome and not have any kind of resources, not know what to deal with or how to deal with what he saw. So that really got to me. And I said, well, Alan, let me talk to my wife and my publisher, because my wife edits everything I write, and I didn't think she was going to be up for it, but she loved the idea right away. And she said, I know how much you like veterans. I know how much you like Project Healing Waters. I think it's a great idea. You should do it. Well, that kind of caught me off guard, but I thought, well, I'll call my publisher. And once I explained to my publisher, Howard Fisher, who owns No Nonsense Guidebooks, I'm like, well, once I tell him I want to write a book that I don't know how to write and that I want Project Healing Waters to make money off every sale, and he's going to have to put up all the money. I didn't want Project Healing Waters to have to invest a dime in the book in case it didn't work out. So there was no risk and nothing but reward. So I explained my idea to him, and he said, oh, we're absolutely going to do it. I said, Howard, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm a volunteer at Fort Huachuca in Arizona. I've been volunteering for Project Healing Waters for 2 years. So we're absolutely going to do it. So that kind of threw me for a loop. And I thought, okay, well, I guess I'm going to do this book. And I had no idea what I was doing. I had an idea that wasn't even my idea. It was Alan Folger's idea. And I didn't know what I was going to do. And about 8 months in, Ed Nicholson, the founder of Project Healing Waters, called me and said, hey, how'd you like to fish the Middle Fork of the Salmon River in Idaho? And I said, I'd love to do that, but I don't think I can go. And he kept pushing me, and I kept saying I couldn't go. And finally he said, why can't you go? Why don't you want to go? I said, well, I want to go. I can't afford to go. And he said, Beau, I didn't ask you if you could afford to go. I asked you if you wanted to go. And he said, I think it's important for you to go on 1 or 2 of these trips to see how these guys interact and see how it works at some of these outings. So sure enough, I went out to Idaho and I spent some time with these veterans, and I was pretty much the only non-veteran there. And they're going around introducing themselves, who they are, what branch of the service they were. And when it got to me, I was very self-conscious. Now, I looked like I was in the military because I had a buzz haircut because I was in the fire department. And when they got to me, I just said, no, I'm a lieutenant for Fairfax County Fire Department. And they could tell I was pretty self-conscious. And one of them walked over and put his arm around me and said, well, no, you're just like one of us, except you serve at home. And that really got me. And I said, well, no, really, I'm not like you because nobody's shooting at me at work. I work a 24-hour shift. If it's a long day, they may hold me 12 more hours. So I work for 36 hours straight, and then I come home. And it's not like being on a ship or being deployed overseas where you're gone for a half a year at a time. But the night before, I had spent the night, Project Healing Waters had us spend a night in a hotel before we left for the week to go to, the Bob Marshall Wilderness.
No return.
River of No Return. Right, River of No Return. And my roommate was a staff sergeant named Brian Mancini. And Brian was a fantastic guy. He was a combat medic. And, of course, Ed Nicholson had assigned all the rooms to each person. So I don't think it was by accident that I was with Brian. And, of course, he was a combat medic and I was a medic. So we started talking medic talk. And I was overwhelmed by what he'd been exposed to. And he was telling me some of the things that he'd had to see and do. And at this point, he had traumatic brain injury, and he was missing an eye and had terrible headaches and balance issues. And he said, Beau, I've lost my health. I've lost my career. I've lost my wife. What else do I have to lose in the service of my country? And it really tore me up. I didn't know what to say. And I don't think the average American understands what these men and women go through when they sign up in the military and they just sign on the dotted line and go where they're told. And it really got to me. But I spent a great week on the river with Brian, got to know him pretty well, spent a fair amount of time with him. We stayed in touch with each other for quite a while. He was doing really well. He moved out to Arizona. He started his own nonprofit. He got a service dog. And I actually saw him on Oprah Winfrey one day. Wow. And he was being interviewed for the work he was doing with veterans. And, of course, I'd been working on the book for a while, and I got a call one day that Brian had killed himself. And it really tore me up. So this book is dedicated to Brian Mancini, who took his own life as a result of what he saw at war. And the book was unlike anything I've ever done. I worked on it pretty hard and gave the first couple of drafts to my wife, and I didn't hear anything from her. And finally, I'm like, hey, did you read those drafts? And she said, yeah, they're pretty good, which means they're terrible. I said, well, what's wrong with them? And she said, honey, I know you. I know how you write. And I really don't think you know these guys well. And I got very defensive. And I said, well, what would you do? She said, well, aren't there programs nearby? And I said, yes. So there was one in Fort Belvoir and one in Quantico. And the program leads there, Marty Laxberg, was in the Marine Corps, saw multiple combat tours, and was the head of Quantico, program lead at Quantico at the time. And Bob Gartner, who worked for Bureau of Indian Affairs, worked for the federal government, I think, for almost 30 years, was at Fort Belvoir. She said, just start going to program meetings. Just go be with these guys. So that's what I did. And I just spent time with them. And I got to know them really, really well. And it's not like an average interview that I would do for a fellow outdoor writer or a fly tyer or the different personalities that I've written about. You're talking about somebody who's had their worst day ever and ask them to walk with you through that. And it was pretty tough. The book is, they're all real people. There are no composite characters. They're all real people. And I had to beg them to be involved. None of them wanted the recognition. None of them wanted to be singled out for admiration or respect. They're very, very giving people. And the problem is, in the military, it's not like the civilian world. The civilian world is, what's in it for me? What about me? My next promotion? How much money am I going to make? And the military is very mission focused. It's about the mission, and your shipmates or teammates or other fellow service members. And when they get injured and they're not part of a mission anymore and they're not part of a team, they're lost. And this book tries to explain on an individual level 35 different people. Now, some of them are volunteers, some of them are program leads. It's not 100% veterans, but it is 100% accurate. People need to understand that it costs us a lot to be free.
Yeah.
We're not free by accident. And I think if people had to leave the country and went overseas somewhere, they'd see it's a totally different way of life.
That's it. Wow. I mean, this is obviously a powerful story. This day, Memorial Day, is a powerful day. Maybe take us back there. What is, when you think of Memorial Day, what does this day mean to you? I mean, I think you're talking about a little bit, but how does it feel? Is it all in the book? Could people read this book and get a feel for?
I think so, but I think they also were a little bit removed. I had the honor of knowing Walt Carey, who is actually in the book. Walt was served in Korea as a forward observer and then ended up being in the Navy for 29 years and retired as the command master chief of the USS Forrestal, which was an aircraft carrier. And he got sick during COVID. He did not have COVID, got sick, went to the hospital, and it was during the time where, everybody was supposed to be terrified, yeah, and everybody was isolated from everybody. And he went in completely with his faculties. And the final time I saw him, he was at home and came home to a bed in hospice. And his daughter called me and said, Beau, if you're going to come, you need to come fast. And I went down there and said my goodbyes. And it was hard. And he told me quite a bit about what it was like to serve on a ship and be away from home so far. But his family called me not long after, and they said, hey, he's going to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery. Would you like to come and walk with the family? And I did. And I'm telling you, walking behind that caisson through Arlington National Cemetery, seeing all those gravestones, yeah, It's really humbling. And I think we get so busy and we take our freedom for granted. We don't think about the men and women who have sacrificed so much for us. And it doesn't take much, right? If you see a service member in uniform, maybe they're at a Starbucks or they're at, a Burger King or a Waffle House, pay for their breakfast, pay for their cup of coffee, and just say, hey, thanks. They need to be reminded, because let me tell you, nobody goes into the military for the money.
Yep.
It's a real service and it's a sacrifice. And it doesn't take much to just take a moment to say, thank you, you're appreciated. And I think we need to do that.
Wow.
And I think Memorial Day is a good time to just take a moment back and think about the fact that we live in the greatest country in the world with the most freedom anybody's ever known. And the only reason we have that is by our military strength and sacrifice and the grace of God. That's it.
Yeah, that is, and that's a good call out for today, and Memorial Day, really any day of the year. I mean, you see these occasionally, you'll see somebody, I was just at Costco last week, and there was a couple people coming in, they were in their Army fatigues, and that would have been a good opportunity to do something right, do something nice. And, it's these small things, I think probably people don't realize it, but that buying a cup of coffee or even just saying thank you, do you think that really, it means a lot to those people?
I do. Well, I think everybody likes being appreciated from time to time, but especially when it's done by a stranger, especially when it's somebody they don't know. I just think it doesn't hurt to say thank you. It doesn't hurt to take a moment to recognize the sacrifice, because I cannot stress how much time it took for me to get to know these veterans before they would open up to me and tell me some of the things that they've been through. It was a long process. I probably spent, I estimate, a little over 5,000 hours writing this book. From the day of concept to the day of print was 9 years, because I would work on it and I would stop, and I'd work on it for a while and I would have to stop, because it's really intense. It's very authentic and it's raw. And we get a glimpse into what it's like to be a service member. And I wrote the book for a couple of different reasons. The first was I wanted to honor these men and women, and I knew that they weren't going to speak up for themselves, so I wanted to honor them. I wanted to raise funds for Project Healing Waters, which is why a portion of all the proceeds goes to Project Healing Waters, regardless of where it's sold. And because I wanted to educate the public, and because it's not just the service member, but it's also their families. When you're overseas and your little girl has her 16th birthday and you're not there, that birthday's not coming back. Or if it's Christmas or your kid's graduating from high school, that day won't come again. And if you're in Iraq and Afghanistan, or you're in Djibouti, or you're somewhere over in Germany, or even if you're somewhere on maneuver, somewhere away from your home, those days are coming back. Right? That military service is a real sacrifice. And I don't think it's wrong to take a moment to say thank you. And I think most Americans want to. I think the average American does understand that these men and women don't make policy. They just have to enforce it. And sometimes it's a really hard job. And Memorial Day is just a way for us to take a moment to say thank you to the men and women who have done so much. And some of them have made the ultimate sacrifice. And we just need to take a moment to recognize it.
Yeah. You mentioned Alan. Why do you think he thought you were the right person for this book? Why was he wouldn't let you go? He wanted you to write this book.
I don't know, other than he knew I was passionate about veterans and I love fly fishing. And for me, I'm a retired Fairfax County firefighter. I spent 30 years in the department, and when I retired, I was the captain on my shift and the senior paramedic. And fly fishing did a lot for me to kind of air my head out and to get away from some of the things that I saw at work. And it's much the same way for the veterans, right? They go out there and you get a little water therapy. And Mark Williams, who was a firefighter I worked with, and served in Kosovo. He said something to me I never forgot. He said, Captain, when you go to war, you get dirty. And it's not about what you want to do. It's about what you got to do. And then you come home and you find there's no way to get the dirt off. And I think we all have a little dirt on us from whatever it is that we're experiencing in life. And I think being on a river, listening to the river and seeing the wildlife and getting to connect with the fish is a great way to spend the day. And we all get connected, whether it's through fly fishing or learning how to tie flies, because once that occurs, then you start becoming conservation aware. And you think about groups like Trout Unlimited and other organizations that are out there trying to, make a difference. And I just feel like, Alan knew there was a need. And I would just say to people, you can do something, right? I'm not a guy with a whole lot of money, so I can't write a big check. Despite the fact that I've written a couple of guidebooks, I'm not necessarily a really good guide, but I do write. So that's what I could do. So that's what I did. And I think everybody can do something, whether you want to volunteer with Project Healing Waters or go to their website and make a donation. And, if there's no Project Healing Waters near you, then maybe you can start a program, or maybe you can support other organizations, that do similar work. Warriors in Quiet Waters is out there. Heroes on the Waters is out there. Backcountry Hunters and Anglers has a military outreach. And I think the important thing is to just be available. Just be available and support people wherever you can. And don't think that a small thing can't make a difference, because it can. Listening to people and just spending a day with them on the water can make a big difference. It can make a really big difference. I went shad fishing not long ago. Here in Virginia, we have a big shad run in April. And I went out and I was shad fishing. I looked through my fly box, or some flies I had, and what I found was a fly box from my father-in-law, who had given me a fly box on my 39th birthday. And I'm 59 now. And I went out and caught a shad on a fly that he tied for me. Wow. And that's 20 years later. And I really felt like I had a connection with my father-in-law, who himself served in the Air Force. And it was really cool. It was really, cool. 20 years later, and I still got the fly box, and I've got a couple of the flies. And, it's funny. I kept fishing and fishing and fishing, and I eventually lost the fly. And at first I got a little ticked, and then I thought, and my father-in-law's name was JJ, John Johnson, who ultimately went on to be a forest ranger. I thought he would not be upset that I lost the fly, because that's what you do when you're fly fishing. You get hung up, you get in the trees, you lose the fish, right? But I've got some other patterns, which I will keep. But that little act of buying a little fly box and making it a little notation on the back, it's probably a $10 fly box. It probably took him 5 minutes to write a little note. Not even that. I'm sure tying the flies took longer. But 20 years later, it still had an impact.
Right.
So I don't think we understand when we spend time with these men and women on the water and just be with them. Just be with them and give them an opportunity. And I'll tell you who else has done a great job are landowners who have opened up their private property to have people come fish on the rivers. And that's a big deal. And you often don't hear about it because they just don't talk about it. And I've found that a lot of people are willing to step up. So there are people that donate food, right? I've been to Project Healing Water events where the food was catered by a big barbecue company and they donate all the food, right? I've been to the Mossy Creek Invitational in Virginia, and Golden Corral usually supplies all the food. And it's a behind the scenes thing, but having a good day on the water and then coming in and having a great lunch and sharing a meal with your guide or with a fellow veteran does a world of good. And you can make a difference. You just have to decide that you're going to set the time aside to do it. That's all.
Yeah. Wow. I, wanted to ask you, you maybe talked about a little bit, but what was writing this book? What do you think was the hardest part? I mean, obviously you had these conversations, I mean, everything. And I know some of the stories didn't make it in the book, right?
There were quite a few that didn't make it in. The hardest part was trying to convey their message and staying out of the way. I wanted to make sure, because what happened was they had complete and total control of their narrative. So they would, I would interview them, then I'd write the narrative, and then I would send it to them. They'd get to approve it or make changes. And then if they want to make changes, then I have to rewrite it again, send it back again for another approval, then send it to the publisher, get it edited again, drop the photographs in, write all the captions, then send them back for a final review. It was incredibly time consuming. And I did that process that I just described to you 40 times.
Wow.
And then in the end, only 35 made it into the book for a variety of reasons. I had one veteran that got assigned to a very, let's say, not standard job in the military. And he called me right before the book came out and said, I can't be in there. It would be too dangerous for me. So it had come out. And I can honestly tell you, I could write a whole nother book about what I couldn't put in there. It's just too graphic, just too hard. And I didn't think I was going to, it took so long. I kept telling myself, I can't do this. I can't do this. And people would ask me, how's the book coming along? How's the book coming along? Well, after about year 5, year 6, people figure that you're just not going to do it. They just figure that you've given up. And I wanted to give up. But how do I say to someone, oh, yeah, I quit. I gave up because me writing about you losing your leg was too hard for me to deal with. And I just kept, you got to do it. They did it. And please don't misunderstand me. I'm not equating me writing this book with losing a limb. What I did was nothing, absolutely nothing compared to the sacrifice that these men and women have gone through. The other part is that people don't understand is it's not always the injuries that you can see. I've met veterans that didn't have a scratch on the outside that were very hurt and very injured. And one of the things I dealt with, or I should say I listened to Brian Mancini, was he had to work on people that he knew. Like, as a paramedic, I've seen a lot of bad stuff, right? Shootings, stabbings, electrocutions, hangings, burn victims, snake bites, people trapped under cars, amputations. But I didn't know them. They weren't friends of mine. That's a totally different animal. When you're working on people you know, and then let's throw in that you're getting shot at while you're doing it. So it's a totally different, the hard part is trying to explain to the civilian population what it's like to be in a different world, because that's what it is. It's a different world. And I know for a fact, one of the things, I was at a book signing recently, and I saw this veteran, and he said, hey, I want to buy a book. And I said, George, you already got one. He said, yeah, I know. This one's for my therapist. And so I'm having people buy them and send them to relatives, either relatives that they wanted to just explain how their life story came about, or they know a veteran that needed some help. And I'm hoping maybe the Veterans Administration decides to pick some of these books up and put them in some of the VA hospitals, or, maybe occupational therapy centers or recreational therapy centers, because these recreational therapists and occupational therapists, they're having a huge impact, because after the doctors do the surgery and the nurses do the nursing, it's really hard to learn how to walk again. It's really hard.
Right.
Some of these men and women have severe burns and they have to move their limbs, and it's very, very painful. And those occupational therapists and physical therapists are there with them for months. So I would just say there are a lot of people out there doing some good work, and this book was just my attempt at recognizing these men and women for the tremendous sacrifice that they've made.
Wow. On the people that are in this book, was that something, how did you, choose or, select the 40 people? Was it, are they a diversity of backgrounds, men, women, all sorts of,
Yeah, it was. Yeah, we've got everything: men, women, tall, short. All the different branches. It was odd. I don't know how to explain it other than I would meet somebody and I could just tell I need to write about this person. And to a person, they didn't want to do it. None of them said, "Oh, sure, yeah."
Oh, they didn't.
None of them. Not. Well, I had to beg them. I literally had to beg them to let me write about him. And what I would say is, okay, let's say you're Dave. All right, Dave, look, I want to write about you. No.
Yep.
Well, listen, let me interview you. Tell me your story, and then I'll write it, and then I'll send it to you, and then you can decide whether it goes in or not. And you have total control.
You know what I love about that is there's no comparison, but with the podcast, occasionally we get some guests that are skeptical. And when I get them on a call, if I do it beforehand, I'll say the same thing. I'll say, hey, we don't have to air this thing. You can listen to it beforehand. If you don't like it, we won't put it out there. I think it just gives a little peace of mind. So that was smart. And that worked for the most part, except for a few people.
Oh, it did. I had a few at the end that couldn't do it. I had one tell me that their therapist had advised against it because they didn't think the person was ready. Because these are very authentic, raw stuff. This is not, you're going to drink a cup of coffee and everything's going to be fine. Although, I have to tell you, I've been shocked. What has surprised me the most is the amount of people that told me they sat down and read it cover to cover. I didn't think that was going to happen. I had one person read it and then took the second day and read it again, 2 days in a row. And I got to tell you, it's really intense. I didn't think anybody would do that. But I think it resonated with them and they, wanted to see how did things turn out. And it's a very hopeful story. I mean, there's obviously difficult situations, but I've seen Project Healing Waters and the idea that Ed Nicholson had, the Navy captain that founded Project Healing Waters. It is indeed magical, but it takes time. And, they didn't get injured overnight, or they may have gotten injured overnight, but they're not going to get well overnight. But I can honestly say, Dave, I could at least write at least one and maybe two more books from what I couldn't put in. And what really interested me a great deal was Lefty Kreh was going to write the foreword, and unfortunately he passed before that happened. But him telling me what it was like to fight in World War II, what it was like to be at the Battle of the Bulge, what it was like to liberate a concentration camp. And what amazed me was the intensity that he talked to me about. It had been over 50 years. And it was like talking to someone who came back to Iraq or from Afghanistan 2 weeks ago. Wow. That sense of extreme danger and the intensity. And I got some really good advice. Paul Norman, who was a combat tour Marine and a retired gunnery sergeant, I was just saying to him, man, I don't know how to do this. I foundered, even when I was interviewing people, I don't know how to do it. And he said, listen, it's very simple. You write exactly what they tell you to write, and you don't put in another damn word, and you keep anything political out of it. And that's exactly what I did. It is the unvarnished, authentic. Again, like I said, they're no composite characters. These are all real people. And I would just encourage people to pick up the book and maybe give it to a friend or read it themselves, or maybe consider carrying it in their fly shop, because I think it could really help people. I think people need to know. I'd like to think that maybe they would be in some hospitals and somebody might say, hey, if you're late, I've talked to guys who were in the hospital for a year. I can't imagine being in the hospital for a week. And some of these guys were in for more than a year.
Jeez.
He had a lot of time in that bed. So hopefully maybe they would get a chance to read some and see that there's life beyond their injury. When you have a hardcore warrior tell you, Beau, I woke up in the hospital bed And I was sad that I didn't die on the battlefield because so many of my guys didn't make it, and I did. You know, I've had some bad days at work, but nothing like that. And it was an honor, an absolute honor to walk with these men and women. And I joke with people and say, you know Superman, but I know Clark Kent, right? You know Batman, but I know Adam West. You know Spider-Man, but I know Peter Parker, right? I know them before and after. And the one thing I would like to point out is the more courageous things they did, the less likely they are to talk about it. They're not going to bring attention to themselves. The only other thing I'd like to mention is one of the things that I was not able to write about, I mentioned it in the acknowledgments, is regrettably, I did interview a fair amount of women who had been sexually assaulted while they were serving. So on top of their service, they had unspeakable crime committed against them. And in the end, none of them, I'd interviewed 5. None of them wanted to bring their story forward at this time. And I honored that wish, but I think it's something that needs to be acknowledged. But you wouldn't know. Some of these women, you would have no idea. They're most outgoing, positive, utterly fearless, not the shrinking violet type, I assure you. But it didn't happen overnight, right? They met other people that wanted to help them. They got involved in fly fishing. They met other veterans, men and women that listened to them. And Ed Nicholson said something to me I'll never forget. He said, my idea from Project Healing Waters was to build a bridge and to bring people from the dark side of the river across the bridge into the light. And he said, Project Healing Waters wasn't built for you to get into Project Healing Waters and stay there your whole life. You can. There are people that have been in for years and years and years and years, but it's a transition catalyst. And the fly fishing is just a catalyst for connectedness and being with other people. I went out and fished with a couple of Marines the other day. We didn't catch a single fish, and I had a fantastic time and would go out with those guys again in a minute because it's not about the fish. And it doesn't hurt. Don't get me wrong. I like catching fish, and I've caught some nice fish. The thing about Project Healing Waters is, they're an equal opportunity employer. They do warm water, cold water, salt water. They go all over the place. And but mostly they care about people. And again, I would just recommend people go to the website, consider donating, whatever they feel if you can.
Yeah, what was that website again?
ProjectHealingWaters.org.
Yeah. Do you think, I'm not sure if any of these, it sounds like it was a challenge. Do you think any of these veterans would be, interested in coming on a podcast? Because I've talked to Project Healing Waters in the past, and I know I didn't even talk about the topics of the people because I was really worried that, I didn't want to bring it up. But I don't know, have they been on podcast?
I can give you some suggestions of some people that you might want to talk to. I don't think there's an official spokesperson per se that speaks on behalf of the veterans. I think each person speaks for themselves. But I would be more than glad to give you some people's names that were in the book, and you can contact them and see if they'd be willing to speak up for themselves, right? They, just like me, I can't speak for Project Healing Waters as an organization. Now the book is called Healing Waters, Veteran Stories of Recovery in Their Own Words, but it's a project that I did on my own with a great deal of collaboration from Ed Nicholson and obviously the people that were there. But I don't speak for them. I have no official standing within the organization. I just love it and want to see it continue to grow and flourish.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think that, I could see, if we could, I could see that every Memorial Day having maybe a tribute where I bring somebody on who's willing to talk about their story. Just because I think today what you've done is help clarify a lot of things, people don't see, behind the scenes, which is amazing. Do you know this is kind of a random thing, but May 27th, right, is Memorial Day. Or I guess why is the date? Do you know anything about that?
No, I just know it was set aside as a presidential order to remember, those that have fallen. And I just think that we each need to remember every time we see a man or a woman in uniform, we don't know what they've gone through or what they've had to do to get to where they're at. I'll give one piece of advice, though. If you are around a veteran who you think has been injured or you think suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder or whatever, here's my advice. Just treat them like you want to be treated. Let me tell you what they don't want. They don't want to be pandered to. That's not what they're looking for. And if that veteran wants you to know about their worst day of their life, they'll tell you when they're ready on their terms, right? You can't just walk up and, so, what was it like being in Vietnam? They're not going to tell you. I remember one, Keith Gilbert, who I wrote about, who served in the 82nd Airborne. Great guy, wonderful human being. He remembered coming home and having somebody walk up to him and say, hey, did you have to kill anybody while you were over there? And of course he did. It was in multiple firefights. And Keith's standard answer was, no, I didn't see much action. Mostly I just played basketball while I was over there.
Right. How did you do that, Beau, in your book? I mean, how did you get, when you're sitting down the interview, get them to tell, the stories?
Honestly, I think it helped some that they knew I'd worked for the fire department and they knew that I'd seen a few things. And I knew as a writer, I had somebody ask me, hey, when did you know you were getting the kind of material that you wanted for your book? And I said, that's easy. When I started having nightmares, that's when I knew. And not to be overly emotional, but when I'm writing somebody's narrative and I'm crying so hard I can't see what I'm writing, that's when I know it's intense. But it's something that, just like any friend that you have, you can tell when they're having a good day and when they're not having a good day. And, you just have to be there. And they honestly had to be, it was a pretty brave thing to do what they did just to be vulnerable. Because you got to understand, these people are talking about the worst day of their lives. They're talking about when they're riding in the vehicle and their Humvee hits an IED and everybody in the vehicle but them dies.
Jeez. Or
they're in a firefight and the next thing they know, they're missing their leg from the knee down and they didn't know it. Or they did not get physically injured too bad, but they lost one of their best friends, right? I mean, one of the best interviews I did was with a Marine that operated a forward operating base that lost about 30%. I believe 35% of the people in his unit got killed. And in the end, he just couldn't make it public because it hurt too much. Yeah. It hurt too much. And they're afraid they're going to get judged. They don't want to be seen as somebody who needs any help. One thing I did learn about the military is I don't care how bad you get hurt, the answer for everything is a couple of ibuprofen, And I'm only half joking. The whole idea of the Army is, well, just suck it up, buttercup, drive on. Whatever it is, just keep going. Keep going. Right. I had Duke Davis, who was a Marine sniper that I interviewed, great guy. I remember him telling me he was arguing with his surgeon. They had a problem with one of his fingers, and he started arguing with his surgeon to just go ahead and finish cutting my finger off so I can get back to the front and fight.
Jeez.
And he's dead serious. He's not joking. Yeah. Right? Now, thankfully, this surgeon had met a Marine before and knew what Marines were like, and he's like, no, we're not doing that. And thankfully, Duke did keep his finger. But we here in America live in a great deal of safety, and it cost us. It cost us a lot, and we're so insulated from it, we don't know it. And I'd like to think the one thing we learned from Vietnam was that you can't go to war and not support the warriors on and then off the battlefield. And we lost more people. They came home and killed themselves than we did in the war. And same thing in Afghanistan. And
that's crazy.
We just need to remember that to whom much is given, much is expected. And we've been given a great deal of freedom and security, and we need to appreciate those that have helped provide it. And I would encourage people to go, if they ever get a chance, to go to Arlington National Cemetery or go to the tomb of the unknown soldier that is guarded 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And everybody else in Northern Virginia, when it's snowing and it's 9 degrees and it's snowing sideways, the old guard is out there standing watch. It can be a hurricane. It doesn't matter.
Wow.
They're standing watch over those remains of service members who we don't know. And I would just say, I just scratched the surface. That was one of the things that I talked with Lefty about. We were sitting on the back of on the back porch of the South Holston River Lodge overlooking the Holston River. And I was telling him about my struggles, and he put his arm on my shoulder and he said, "Though sooner or later, you're just going to have to say, okay, that's enough." He said, because there's always going to be somebody to write about, sadly. So eventually I stopped, and the book did come about. And I won't lie, when I got my first copy, I actually broke down and cried. And Brian Mancini's father, William Mancini, who lives in Arizona, got the very first copy. And it was dedicated to Brian. And I'll be thinking about Brian today and many other days. And I would just say thank you to you. If you're a veteran and you're listening to this podcast, if you're like me and you listen to Wet Swing, podcast, I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your service. Thank you for your dedication. Thank you for caring enough to keep me and my family safe.
Well said, Beau. I think we could leave it there for today, and appreciate your passion and putting all the work into this book, and letting people know what's going on. And I just want to thank you. We didn't touch on anything else of what you have going on, which is a lot. So we'll be following up with you in the future. But beaubeasley.com, people can check out the book. Yeah, thanks, Beau, for all your time today, and I want to thank everybody out there for all the hard work that everybody's put into this.
Me too, and I especially want to give a shout out again to Project Healing Waters and to all the program leads and assistant program leads and regional coordinators, all the people behind the scenes, and especially to our veterans, men and women in uniform. Thank you very much. God bless you.
I'm not going to say much other than I appreciate Beau for putting his time into this project. It's out there in the world now. You can check it out. You can go to beaubeasley.com to get the book. Beau mentioned a couple other places you can get it as well. If you get a chance, the best thing you can do today, though, is to let any person you see out there know, veteran, let them know, call Project Healing Waters, show your support, do whatever you can. And I'm going to leave it right there for today. And I hope you enjoyed this episode on this powerful day for us here, Memorial Day. So I'm looking forward to getting back into it next week, and I appreciate you for sticking around to the very end of this episode. And I hope you have a great morning, a great afternoon, or a great evening wherever in the world you are. Look forward to catching you on that next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Wet Fly Swing Fly Fishing Show. For notes and links from this episode, visit wetflyswing.com.